So there's a
Right.
couple things we do, and we have blue sky sessions pretty regularly. But it always starts with whether it's internally with a client, starting with what is our purpose, what do we try, why do we exist as an organization?
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each of these episodes, I get to sit down with different BPM practitioners from all different industries, from all different walks of life, with all different amounts of experiences and stories to share. And I think that's one of the most valuable things about each of these episodes is you're hearing a different perspective. You're hearing how BPM can bring value to an organization, not in a theoretical sense, but how is this person embedded it into their organization? How have they overcome the challenges and the obstacles that potentially could arise? And today I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Joseph Drasin. Now, Joseph is a Senior Director of Enterprise Planning and Continuous Improvement at a large American university. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, Joseph. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And something you said is really something I love about this discipline and the industry we work in is that it is so diverse and we all come from such interesting backgrounds and we all take a different approach to the topic.
That's great. That's amazing. And talking about background, tell us how you were first introduced to the topic of BPM and then take us on a bit of a journey leading up to what you're doing today.
Sure. And actually, I think I was involved with BPM long before I ever knew what it was. So coming out of university, I worked in the technical field. I was what we'd now call a software engineer and database administrator. And I liked that work and I still find technology interesting. But pretty early in my career, I was really struck by two things that I found very frustrating. And it kind of led me on the path to where I am today. The first of them was that I was, like I said, I was pretty good at my job, but the quality of the software and the technology that we were developing actually was not a determinate impact on whether whatever we were trying to solve was successful. It actually wasn't even a particularly large component of that. So that was very frustrating for me. I also found something I really enjoyed in my work is I love diving into my clients. What is their business? What are they trying to do? What's their ethos? How do they work? It's like, some of us when we were young like to take apart televisions. Well, I was really enjoying the process of taking apart organizations. So I was really into that process before I ever even understood that there was this concept of BPM. And that really changed then when I went to grad school, both the first and second time, where I was exposed to these concepts of not only enterprise architecture, which is a big aspect of it, and that started to piece together, oh, okay, now all this stuff that I've been thinking and struggling with, I now have a language behind it.
Right.
But then particularly in graduate school with my research and then practice work in how organizations go through change, how people experience change, then I started to really see, okay, now I understand when we build technology, we design processes, those are awesome. How do we bring that narrative through with people who have to use that technology or execute those processes or impacted by those processes? How do they all, intertwine with one another? And that really is what excited me and got me to, it's probably now a decade ago, I'm now speaking to where I am, where we started building up this, where I am right now, we started building up this now pretty large consultancy, really predicated on, we do a lot of BPM work. We have a whole practice around process improvement, but it's always done with this understanding of people. I like to say when we build these models, and I do like building models, whether they're swim lanes or flows or what have you, but never losing sight that I always say those boxes are people and those lines are relationships, and
Right.
you're moving those around, and that's very personal to people. And often the challenges I see is when organizations don't take that into account. And when you do think about it, when you do take that, that approach of thinking about that, we find a lot of success. And that's really the last decade of my life has been about building up our practice and trying to find ways we can better engage with organizations wanting to go through large scale process changes. So that's really kind of where I am today. I still do a lot. We still do a lot of BPM work. I don't get to do quite as much as I do. We still build models, but I would say I spend more time with doing things like force field analysis and then actual process modeling.
Right. And would you say that in the same way that you almost fell into this topic of business process management, or it was something that came natural to you? It was something that that's the way how you naturally thought or saw the world. It was through process and through how can we deconstruct this and put it back together and understand what are all the moving parts? How can we improve how this is working? Do you think that for some people it's just good? Because I have heard that a lot in a number of the other interviews where my guests, they were doing process improvement or managing business processes long before they had any terminology behind it.
I think that is almost universal. I think I'm actually really interested what the future shows now that we have, I have undergraduate students I teach in business process improvement, what it's going to be like for them that they get exposed so early. But I think that's really common. I see it a lot in my staff as well. Very, very few of them came out of college looking to do process work. I literally have a critical care nurse. I have software engineers. I have a movie producer. Like they came from but they all share a couple different traits. And I always say when I'm looking for people, I look for obviously intelligent, hardworking. We all want that. But passion and curiosity. You just want to know why things are the way they are and you care about it. And another thing I add a lot to that is empathy and humility. Just this constant desire to learn and understand and know when you go into a new organization, there's a reason things are how they are. We're not saying it's a good reason or that it's a good situation, but appreciating why it is how it is. There's a reason. But you still want to help people. And I think that is really important. Again, curiosity, you want to understand, but then you want to help people. You want to improve the process, not just for the organization to be more efficient or more lucrative or whatever, but to make things better. It sucks to come to work in a bad process.
Yes, yeah, definitely, absolutely. I'm sure a lot of people would agree with that, and I think there'd be a lot of people out there right now that in their jobs, in the work that they're doing from a day-to-day basis, I think most of us would have elements of what we do that we wish we could, automate or get rid of somehow, so that we could free up our time to do more of those things that we actually do enjoy doing. And
Absolutely.
So I know that you have a keen interest, or when we had a conversation a while back, you were talking about this idea of organizational psychology. How does that tie into tell us what that is and how does that tie into business process management? I guess, on this series, we've got a diverse audience. And so I just want to make sure that anyone that's listening right now, that they, I guess, get the basics of what organizational psychology is and how does it tie in?
Absolutely. And I think actually a lot of people who work in this field dabble in it a lot more than they realize. And I've listened to several of your guests and they touch on these topics all the time. So I'll try and simplify kind of what my interest is and when I work in this area. And my research was officially in management, but I was looking at, where it started for me is when organizations go through large scale change. So we're talking reorganizations, merger and acquisitions, and large, enterprise systems implementation. I was interested in why people feel stressed. Why is it that they go through this stress? And I won't go into really dive into it because it gets extremely nerdy. But that experience that people have, why is, and it's very debilitating. It's actually incredibly costly to organizations to have your people stressed. They become disengaged. They can sabotage, and it's actually all very natural. We often, without realizing as organizations, trigger people's fight or flight response. when going through large scale change, if it's not managed, us as individuals, so there's now kind of individual psychology, are not designed to deal with a lot of uncertainty. BPM can create a huge amount of uncertainty. Our natural reaction, developed over hundreds and thousands of millions of years as we become, it triggers this fight or flight response. So we don't want to do that. It's really bad when people go through that. They become disengaged with work. We often perceive that as resisting change, which is it's an incorrect assessment of that.
Right. Okay.
That's a lot of my work was academically was looking at what is really happening when people are resisting change. And so again, organizational psychology, we're looking at the individual, what's motivating them, what's driving them, but then also how does that coalesce into a group that's trying to solve a problem or make a product or whatever. And if I could, take a step back to that, when we implement change in organizations, I think we need to be honest that often our staff and our middle management's responses are rational responses. Changes put in by many organizations have not been positive changes for people. We've cut staff, we've cut benefits, we've cut salaries. One of the greatest examples, and for all the horrible things COVID has caused, we all remember last March, 18 months ago on March, it's now been over a year, we all went remote instantly. I don't know a single staff, and I have surveyed organizations, almost no staff was against that change. So this idea that staff can't make drastic changes and won't embrace drastic changes, I think that proved that that's not the case. It's often how we're approaching the change. What is the value proposition for the staff who are going to be impacted by that change? And so that's why we really look at those kind of things. And, we'll use models like SCARF, which is a really popular one, and which looks at different components of certainty and how it's going to affect relationships, how it's going to affect autonomy, how it's going to affect concepts of self and fairness, how are different stakeholders going to perceive it. And then if you look at that ahead of time, then you can try and put interventions in. Okay, this is why people won't feel impacted, or at least we acknowledge that there's going to be an impact. There's a way to approach deliberation decision making that even if people do not get their way or are impacted negatively, as long as they understand and feel they had their time to speak and it was sincerely listened to, and they understand who and how the decisions are made, they actually will continue to often engage with the decision that even wasn't their first pick, let's say.
Yes.
So that, right. I hope that helps kind of explain the perspective that we try and take with that.
Yeah, definitely. And we would have a number of listeners that would be working in organizations where, they are encountering these challenges of, it's working with people and understand how do you work with these people. And I think each of them are facing different, that there are different obstacles to overcome. For some, it's terminology. For some, it's like this, they're talking to people who maybe have done business process management in the past. It wasn't effective, it wasn't implemented well. And so as soon as they start using that terminology, the person they're speaking to or they're trying to get on board with their vision already has this, I guess, preconceived position or preconceived stance on what BPM can do. And so sometimes it can be hard for them to rally those process advocates, if you wanted to call them that. And then likewise, as you were saying there, I guess traditionally a lot of change hasn't been viewed as super positive. The people that are the process participants or the process performers, the people that are at the coalface and doing the work, when change is coming up, there can be this potential fear of like, well, what does that mean for me? Am I going to end up worse off, or is it going to be a better change for me?
Absolutely. And I just wanted to add, because it gets into some really interesting aspects. Obviously, when people hear, I'm going to have to do more work, and I'm not going to get paid anymore. They're not big fans of that, and I don't blame them. Or, you know, you're going to cut my pay or benefits, or heaven forbid, I'm going to be laid off. But there's actually really interesting research out there that those things all suck, without a doubt. But what really debilitates people is not knowing. And often organizations in BPM efforts, particularly if they're very long term, and you know, we don't like to do long projects because we need to start showing results and impacts and comfort very quickly. The longer people don't know, that's what they really struggle with. It's not even once decisions are made, often people can deal with it. It's when they don't know and they feel something bad is coming.
Yes, right. And do you have examples, an example or a story, or could you paint a picture for us of what it does look like when a huge transformation or change has been implemented well, where, you know, the results of that has been a workforce that have been felt empowered, they've felt on board, they've bought into the vision from day one. Obviously, there's always going to be it's probably not every situation is going to be smooth sailing, but do you have an example where you can show what's possible? Because I think that you know, for especially whoever's holding the purse strings, whoever's in that senior leadership or that C-level executive, if they're going to invest into anything, throw resources at anything, they're going to want to know, well, what is possible? What tangible benefits are there? So do you have any examples you can share where it has played out to the organization's benefit?
Certainly, and I'll start with something you said a little bit ago, and this is kind of how I try and engage in these conversations. So you're 100% on board with what you said about when people hear BPM, they sometimes have a very negative reaction. And, you know, when people have a negative reaction, my response is there's probably a good reason they're having that negative reaction. And so I almost never would use that term. I mean, when I'm obviously with colleagues who work in the industry, we talk about it all the time, but with a client, it's really about what are you struggling with? What are you trying to do? And a couple things that early on I try and establish is spending a lot of time with them and their staff. We're probably not even billing at this point, understanding their lives. And I find, and it doesn't take more than a week or so, I find when you can come back and show that you have honored and appreciated the work that they do, and you appreciate the complexity, you know, their history and their stories and their culture, that helps a lot with those conversations, because you're then also allowed to also start able to describe and tell stories. Okay, I'm already starting to see what's happening with your organization. And we're not doing that with, you know, diagrams. We're doing that with stories and data and opportunities and things like that. So that's how we approach it. You know, there's a couple projects that come to mind. One is not a traditional BPM project, but I think it encapsulates this. I have another good example, which is very BPM focused. So we were helping a large organization with a move, which is actually, you might not believe it, is one of the most traumatic experiences for anyone is to go through a move. There's a great I use this in talks all the time. There's this great study that was done on an organization. I always save the punchline that was going through a change, and they charted the emotional state of the people, and they actually go through the phases of grief. They go through bargaining, anger, denial, acceptance. I mean, very, very powerful emotions. Of course, the punchline is this is a group that was moving offices. And so I just want to predicate that with this is actually a very emotional experience for a lot of people. And we worked with the organization. Okay, you're going from a very prestigious part of town to a less prestigious part of town. You're going from all offices. Of course, everyone's going to an open workspace. There was a bunch of perceived negative aspects, and the staff and managers were not really pleased with this. And in our role there, we were obviously managing the move and managing how this new site was going to work to execute the type of business they do, how we're going to design rooms and things like that. But we spent a lot of time talking with staff and gathering how is this affecting them. And then we implemented a lot of interventions around decision making, around how requests and acknowledging concerns people had. And we work with leadership. What can you give to show the employees that you really care about them and you're doing this for their benefit? And it was one of those projects that when we started, I don't have the data in front of me, but I mean, it was like 90% hated. And when we got to the end, with this move, and people, it was hilarious because on the first day of moving, the biggest surprise, everyone was like, the wireless actually works. This is amazing. But people moved in and like everyone listened to us. We gave, one of the real challenges in a move, and this is true in your personal life too, is you lose control of your environment. And so we found ways to give people control over their environment. And some of these things were not cheap, letting people configure their desks, but we, explained to the executives, and, yes, it's hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, but it will mean a whole lot to people for you to do that. And it will return on investment. And productivity at the new site was actually higher than productivity at the old site. And it's actually a much cheaper site to run because of that. So it's actually, we can turn this into dollars that you save money, but we do have to often do that. But, I'm also saying we can take this approach of analytical analysis and process improvement, and how are you going to engage in these different, work build functions, but you can also do it through how are we going to make it so the staff and managers also are engaged and happy with the process. The other one I think of, and this was probably from about 5 years ago. We were working with a large financial organization, kind of a sales, fundraising organization. There's very large agreements that get brought in, and these are kind of foundational grants, and these are, 7 figures, millions of dollars often. And it was a really broken process. And there are kind of 3 components involved, 3 groups involved. There are the people who make the sales. There's a legal department that has to make sure how the money is being allocated is legal. And then there's kind of this financial stewardship. And this is a really challenging organization, and for a number of reasons. But one is, and this is true of any sales organizations, particularly ones that are profitable, is things are good. Like they're making money, and they're bringing more money in every year than the last year. So it's, when you go in and go, what's your problem? It's sometimes, it's easy when you can point to, hey, you're losing $1 million. I can help you not lose $1 million. But what we were able to identify very quickly is the processes were not keeping up with the scaling of the organization. That's something very common we see is successful organization gets really, really successful, and suddenly the processes start breaking down because they weren't designed to, they were designed to process 50 activities, and now they're processing 500, and it just doesn't work. And the reaction most organizations have to that is they try to band-aid it. We're going to fix this little piece of the process. We're going to fix that little piece of the process. And when we came in and we take a very, very broad look of, the end-to-end process. Many of your guests have talked about that, and that really is the heart. And I think one of the things that makes BPM so powerful is you're taking this holistic, end-to-end, top-to-bottom view of what does this process look like. I think this is also a lot of that value you were asking about, how we show value to executives is very quickly within a week you can really visualize for someone what their organization looks like. And we sometimes don't, we forget this all the time. Most people, whether even if at the executive level, don't really understand the end-to-end of a value delivery of a product development. They know it in general, but they don't know the deep, and they certainly don't know the depth. So when they start seeing, oh, now I'm seeing how my organization works, it's really, really powerful. And in this example with this group, we found you have these 3 groups working really hard, trying to improve. Actually, every time they're trying to improve, it's making your overall process work. They're locally optimizing. It's actually breaking it's breaking the overall process. And a lot of it had to do with their KPIs and how they're being evaluated were really misaligned. The salespeople were being told, sell as much as you can. Legal departments is, do not let us get sued. And financial people, I really don't fully understand what they do today, but they were told you have these controls you have to have in place, and everything every I has to be dotted and T has to be crossed. And these are really incompatible. So we worked with them. And again, I should reiterate with both these examples, these are not long projects. The build out we did was, I want to say it was 20 weeks from start to finish for a building construction and design. This project was maybe 6 weeks for a major we're talking about an organization that processes 9 figures worth of money annually. So we went in and we brought the 3 groups in, and we this is one of those times we call it using we use swim lane as a story. And you have it up on the wall, and I'm able to walk these 3 groups into their end-to-end process, and they really start to see how they fit into the overall picture and how powerful that was. And they really started to see how some of their own activity, if our whole goal, and this is philanthropy, our whole goal is to get money from people who have it to people who really need it in a safe and legal manner. And before we came in, this process, which it sounds absurd, was of just getting the money from someone. I want to give you $10 million to, you're now in a place where you can start distributing $10 million. Again, I don't have the data, but I think we were talking on the order of 2 to 3 months, which is annoying enough if you're a person trying to give someone money, but that's 2 to 3 months of lost opportunity. I think when the project was done, we were on the order of under 7 days to get from beginning to end. So just the calculation of the interest they were earning in addition was like a lot of money. But more importantly, it saved people a huge amount of time. It saved the organization a ton of money. It made their customers happier. It was really that every stakeholder in this engagement won. And like I said, it was like a 6-week process. And I think that's really important to take with these approaches, is there is these quick engagements, getting these quick wins is really important, because like you said earlier, there can be a lot of money spent, and people are always wanting to know, what am I getting out of this? You need to show me results quickly, and things that are tangible to me, whether it's money or employee engagement or product purchases, whatever it is. You always have to be able to tie it back to something like that.
Yes, right. And how do you know what's possible when embarking on a process improvement initiative? Like for this group, they were making money year on year, and revenue was increasing, and for them it was like having broken processes and needing to, I guess, establish processes that would support the growth and the scale of this business. I guess when embarking on an initiative, how do you know what to aim for, what your target is, what is possible in improving a process? I guess you'd have some more ambitious people out there that would look at a process and be like, how can we radically transform this? How can we do this in a way that's never been done before? How can we really pioneer in this particular way? And then you'd have other, I guess, people that would be more like, well, how can we incrementally change this just a little bit, day by day, over a year, 2 years? If we just tweak it by 1%, we're going to see gradual improvement, sustainable improvement. Is it dependent on the people driving it and what their risk appetite is, or how do you set those goalposts when you are embarking on that process improvement exercise?
So it's certainly part of it is what you just said. It depends, and there's personalities. It depends on the industry. A lot of it depends on the process itself. Is this a mission critical process? Is this a process that I use to differentiate myself from my competitors? Then yeah, I probably am going through radical transformation constantly, because whatever I'm doing, if I'm a market leader in this one area, or that's my strategic differentiator, whatever cool I'm doing, everyone else is copying me. So I need to constantly be, radically transforming it. In other cases, that kind of incremental improvements are the approach, but usually when first starting, that's not my first thought. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, I guess I should say radical transformation is just more fun. But as a process and a thought, it's it allows more creativity. There often is, and people like to engage with that. If you tell a group of people, we're keeping this process, tell me how to make it 5% better, you don't have an interesting discussion, and I'm probably not worth my dollars. But if I come into a room and I say, okay, for now, I'm going to pretend there's no limits. How should this work? What, we start with the goals. Why are we doing any of this? Why does any of this matter? Let's have those transformational discussions. I think you have a lot more opportunities. And if you try and just go incremental, you immediately shut out possibilities and you shut down people's breadth of thought. And I think that's really unfortunate. There's also the issue that environments are changing so much. So if you just change, I don't even know how you quantify 1% or 5% of change. But you probably need to be doing 5% of change or 10% of change a year just to stay where you are.
Right.
So I think it's really hard to really have an organization that can go through that continuous improvement in that incremental way. And my group, has continuous improvement in its title, but that is about continually trying to innovate and radically transform. No, it doesn't mean every time we go into a project, I'm recreating a business operation model, but we're always thinking that that's a possibility.
Yes.
And the clients, that's what they are hoping for every time. No one hires you to save them 5%.
And I guess when bringing your team along for that journey, because we got people that are working within organizations, they're not coming in from that consulting sort of perspective or that advisory role. They're working internally, they're working with their colleagues, the ones that they've been with for however long, 18 months, 2 years, 5 years. How do you go about, I guess, empowering your people, your team to what do they say, like it's the blue sky, your the blue sky picture, or what is possible? Let's dream for a bit. Let's have a session where we think of the what are the biggest ideas we can throw out there, because you can always scale back, and you can always break it down into like, okay, if that's where we want to be, what do we need to be doing today? What are the small steps we need to take to get to this, to, I guess, execute this blue sky vision, or this grand master plan of where we want to get for, like, in speaking of radically transforming this process. Yeah, how do you equip people or empower people to be creative, to think of, like, maybe for them it would have been the impossible, but for someone that's been through radical transformation, knows that, like, hey, that you can get a whole lot more done than maybe what you think.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's going to be actually interesting. With COVID having created so many radical transformations, how will that change? In the years to come, people's natural state. So, but to answer your question, and I should say that I work both internally and externally in my organization. So I think my roles, I'm very fortunate in that way, but I get to see both sides of that. So there's a couple things we do, and we have blue sky sessions pretty regularly, but it always starts with, whether it's us internally with a client, starting with what is our purpose, why do we exist as an organization? And not just financially, of course, we want to make money, but like, what are we trying to who are we trying to serve? What are we trying to solve? And starting with that question, and we know how we're solving it, or how we're serving, or how we're producing that product today, but what should we be? And it is about getting a group of people and to say, for the next hour, we're just going to throw out crazy stuff. And we're just, whatever comes to mind, we're going to put it up there. I mean, most of this stuff doesn't go anywhere, but it's more about exercising that brain, because it is easy when you get into this work, particularly when you do it every day, I've seen this before. I know how to solve this. I know how to, what to look for. And it's so important to constantly be reminding yourself to take that step back and think of, thinking again, why are we doing this? What's this about? What is the big picture? Because it is so hard to work on things you're familiar with. You get blinders on, and you can't see the art of possibility, as they say. So you need to be constantly pulling yourself back and encouraging those around you to constantly be pulling themselves back. But it is difficult. I think that's why it sometimes is helpful to come from the outside. There is some benefit for just a touch of ignorance. And it's also really helpful to not be so close. An example is even within the group I run, when we were going through our methodology design, and we go through a period every so often where we kind of step back and think, what are we trying to solve? Is our methodological approach really the best way? We were going through this, and despite the fact that myself and the members of my team are all professionals and get paid to do this for others, we actually brought in an external person to do it for us, to help facilitate our conversation.
Right, okay.
Because we know we can't do that on our own. It's like me trying to critique my children. Like, I'm not the one to do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think it for me, it reminds me of the number of all of those, unicorn startup stories you hear about, where that we've had a lot of industries disrupted over the last 10, 15 years. And a lot of those stories start with people that entered into industries that they weren't initially part of. Like you've got as far as I'm aware, you've got the Airbnb guys that, they found themselves in a sticky situation, and they had this idea came about because they were just trying to solve the problem that was immediately in front of them. They end up disrupting an entire way we do travel. Or you've got the Uber story, or any of the sort of social media platforms, that you've got the music streaming like Spotify, things like that they're disrupting the way that industry has operated up until now. And oftentimes it is people that come in with a different perspective, an outside perspective, that, as you were saying, that they don't have their blinders on, they haven't been so ingrained in the way the industry operates that they can't think of, what is a totally different way that we could deliver value as an organization. And I guess a new thing that I'm hearing, and maybe it's been around for a while, but larger organizations are now adopting this idea or this concept of having incubators, internal incubators, where you can have a group of people that they're trying to foster this startup environment, this startup sort of style of thinking, where they can think of, well, how can we disrupt what we're already doing? Because if we don't disrupt our own organization, someone else is going to do that for us.
Absolutely. And there's a couple thoughts come to mind. I mean, one of them is what you said earlier is one of the reasons I think it's so important to have diverse groups in process improvement groups. And I mean diversity in all the capital D and lowercase d ways. People who come different backgrounds, different disciplines, different industry, because they see things differently. And we know that true creativity comes when you bring all those together. And that's when the cool stuff comes out. And to what you just said, yes, this this intrapreneurship is called, and internal consultancy, which is really what one thing my organization does, is really important, because we've seen, you mentioned some great examples, and if you go back to Kodak or Blockbuster, some of these huge companies that were really, really successful. And it's not that they didn't know that, Kodak didn't know digital photos were coming. Kodak made digital pictures. It's not like Blockbuster didn't know Netflix was coming. Blockbuster had an online video streaming service. The issue was, at a senior level, their culture couldn't adapt to it. And there's all sorts of really interesting writing on why that was. But I think it is really important to have this constant drive. Now, I would add to that is, I don't think it should just be one group in an organization. Even when you're a large group, you really do want to keep fostering that that desire to constantly be rethinking. Because just as you said, like, if you don't improve and radically transform, like, someone else will. I mean, if you read the book Good to Great, it talks about all these wonderful organizations that are really successful. And what we know is, less than a decade later, over half of them were bankrupt. And so it shows, like, even if you're great, like, you cannot rest on those laurels. If you look at the Fortune 500 from, even 50 years ago, how many of them are actually on the Fortune 500 now? And it's a trivial number. So there's a little bit of hubris I think we get caught in sometimes, thinking of what we're doing today is going to be what is successful tomorrow. And you constantly need people in your organizations, whether they're BPM professionals or people who think in a BPM way and constantly are thinking of and being curious about, why do we do things this way? How can we look at the broad end to end of what we're really trying to do here to make us more effective at what we're doing?
Yes, that's right. And you mentioned COVID a few times there, and I think it's a good point to touch on, because it has been something that has, everyone can relate to. It has disrupted a lot of supply chains. It's disrupted a lot of organizations and the way we deliver value. I mean, some businesses are completely different or have completely new areas opened up that have really benefited the organization. That they've been able to scale and grow because of what the environment and what they've been forced into. They've almost been forced into a position where you do need to think outside the box and think of, well, how can I survive through this? How can I thrive through this? And unfortunately, some organizations haven't made it through. But talk to us about the past 18 months or thereabouts, and how has business process management played a part? Do you think that it's been something that's been valued and it's been brought up that priority list? Or do you think it's something that's still not understood across the board, and so it hasn't really been given the thought and attention maybe as it deserves?
So from my perspective, in my world, it's drastically increased our opportunities.
Right.
And obviously initially it was because we need to redesign a bunch of processes to work remotely. But the follow-on to that was people actually, from a work standpoint, and not just talking about remote work, but people started to see possibilities of, you were forced to work in a new way, and people found out, hey, some of these are actually better than what we were doing before.
Right.
Again, it's horrible why we have to do it, but people have started to become, I think, more open and more accepting and more confident that they can go through the worst change possible and get through it. I would say one challenge I'm seeing right now, I think this is only temporary, I hope it's only temporary, is there is a lot, organizations are really struggling with essentially burnout. They're struggling, they have staff who are having individual challenges, but organizations as a whole, many of them are really struggling. So they're having a little bit of trouble with change like right now, but I think it's a very temporary thing. But I'm certainly seeing and hearing that people have seen a ton of new opportunity, have new confidence in themselves, in their staff, we can do pretty cool things. And that's been, I always try and be an optimist and take the good things out of it. But that's something I've definitely seen, this kind of openness to things that weren't possible, because now we know the things that we never thought were going to happen, they do happen.
Yes, right. And just on that point of burnout, because I had a conversation the other day, another interview that we'll be releasing in a couple of weeks, but my guest is quite interested in the whole mental health aspect of business process management, and I guess it does tie into a lot of what we've been talking about today. But understanding this person's your team or your staff, your employees, understanding their state of mind and what they're coming into work in what sort of what sort of state of mind, because work isn't every second of our life, and we all have other parts that make up our life. So depending on how a person comes into work could change the outcome of the process slightly or significantly. So I think understanding that over this last year with COVID, some of that burnout could be from an organization changing the way it does things, and so there's a lot of things to keep on top of, but there could also be that other pressure of having to homeschool your kids and having to make all these other plans and almost like these external challenges that ultimately it does affect them in the workplace as well.
Absolutely. And I really look forward to that conversation you have and listening to it, because I think that is something that has been missed so much. And, many years of my life was spent a little bit in that area. As I mentioned, I was interested in people's stress and distress when they go through change. And that is so important. And we have absolutely seen performance hits on people who are dealing, you said it, kids at home, family members sick, anxiety. We've seen high performers become medium performers and things like that. And we know it's a thing they're going through. We have good days, we have bad days. And I think that's so important for us to recognize and be thinking about when we're thinking about these changes, that we're affecting those people's lives. We're causing stress that they're taking home. We're causing stress that's affecting, and we just need to be really, not saying we don't do it, because we want to, but we need to be really respectful of that and considerate of what we're doing. Another thing you made me think of is I think we're going to be the last 2 years of data is going to have to be looked at really skeptically. We're just going to put asterisks by all those numbers because processes are going through drastic changes, planned and unplanned. Sales can't happen because we can't even get supply chain. I mean, I won't tell you how long it's taken me to get a new laptop. I mean, so we're all going through these things that it's going to be really hard to do any kind of process analysis comparisons from the last 2 years. So that's going to be really interesting.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And when we talk about or look at the future of business process management over the next 2, 3, 5 years, what sort of trends are you noticing, and where would you encourage organizations to be investing their time, effort, and energy? And obviously, every organization is going to be at a different maturity level when it comes to process management, so they may need different things. But yeah, how would you sort of expand on that?
So, and I will fully admit I'm completely biased in my perspective. So I'll start with that. And there's others who are more technical and looking at, robotic automation and things around process analysis and AI. And I know there's a lot of things going around with that. But some of the big changes I see are driven by a shift I've seen in organizations. First of all, technology is no longer seen as this magical solution. I think we've all become so accustomed to technology that it's been a little demystified, and we know that it doesn't solve problems by itself, which I think is great, because we all know that technology alone doesn't solve problems. So I think there's been a lot more respect for the other parts of that pyramid, process, people, data, which is great. And I think is really important. I'm hoping to see that continue. I think the next step, because technology we've been doing for 60-ish years and we've gotten pretty good at it. Process, this kind of the process side of that triangle we've been doing for a little bit less, but we've been doing for a couple decades. We still have lots to learn, but we're getting good at it. People know it. I do think it's the people side. It's kind of where the future is I'm changing technology, I'm changing process. How do I bring an organization through that story, and how do I be successful? So again, I admit 100% that I'm biased in my view, but I think that's what I'm seeing. One of the recently working with a large organization implementing an ERP. One of the great accomplishments, working with them for many years, is when they announced we're going to implement this, many year project. It wasn't we're implementing this piece of technology. It was we are going through a business transformation process. Oh, and by the way, there's some technology we're buying. And I will tell you, certainly at the beginning of my career, but even 10 years ago, I don't think that's how that would have been positioned. So I think technology is becoming so ubiquitous, it no longer gets people excited or fools people as much. So that's kind of where I see a lot of the focus for BPM. I think there is the data side's also going to becoming huge, and we're becoming almost glutted with data. So how to manage it, how to think about KPIs, I think is going to be a big part of it. It's still an area I see most organizations don't do a great job of it.
Mhm.
So I think that's another area in the future of BPM. How do we align these processes with organizational objectives with analytic models that actually are able to assess how we're doing towards our perceived goals? So
Yes.
that's my take, but if I knew the future, I'd be much wealthier, but that's my take.
That's great. And when you talk about that people component and data, but I guess more specifically people, for someone that's listening right now, that they're in an organization where that maybe they've, just by listening to this conversation, maybe they're acknowledging to themselves right now that, hey, this is an area that we need to give more thought to. We need to invest more into understanding our people and understanding how we can bring along for the various changes that we've got coming up and the various transformations. Where would you encourage that person to go to continue this learning, or to understand, I guess, what are the different various puzzle pieces that they need to understand to ensure that this next 2, 3, 5 years is successful, and that they are able to bring their people along for the journey? Where would you encourage them to go to continue that sort of development or learning?
So I think there's a couple different places, and I'll try not to assign a bunch of textbooks. One of them is actually kind of a lot of what you're doing. This is a really diverse, a really open, and a really welcoming community. It's one of the reasons I love working in this field, is because you just get to know people are so accepting. You can reach out to, you can certainly reach out to myself. Any of your listeners are welcome to. But I've found when I reach out to people in the community or meet new people in the community, that's one of my greatest sources of learning, is listening and sharing my stories and hearing their stories and walking through how we'd solve things. And that, again, it's one thing I love about this community. And related to that, something, which I mentioned earlier, is how the backgrounds of the community is so diverse. There are a lot of good books out there. Actually, a number of the people you've had on have books out there, which I've read and I'm big fans of. So there's some really good text out there. I would also encourage people who are interested in it. As I said, I think curiosity is one of the most important things. So a couple from a podcast, one I always promote is, there's one called 99% Invisible, which has absolutely nothing to do with process, but it's actually about architecture. But when you listen to how they think about problems, and it stimulates interest. And there are times where where something I've heard in a completely different discipline pops into my head while I'm working with a client at a finance organization or whatever. And I'm like, I know this has nothing to do with finance, but I got this idea from listening to how a farmer deals with bee management or something like that.
Yes.
So, and there's HBR has a lot of stuff. It's good to be up to date on that. I'll try and send you a link. There's a wonderful article, I think it was in the New Yorker, called "What Can Medicine Learn from the Cheesecake Factory?" which is all about process improvement and how medicine operates and how this hyper optimized restaurant operates and what they can learn from each other, which I think those kind of cross-disciplinary readings are really, really important, because again, that's where the good stuff comes from. So those are some thoughts. I can send you, happy to share with you, a list of some authors. Like, there's the book Organizational Culture, which is kind of, if you're interested in that is the handbook by Edgar Schein. He was a consultant. It's about his experience going into different organizations and having solutions that didn't work because he didn't understand the culture of those organizations. There's the book The Goal, obviously things that are written by Michael Hammer and others, kind of those seminal pieces, Cotter. Those are always good to read to understand. But honestly, I like to read, but a lot of my learning has come from the community.
Yes, right.
As I'm sure you've learned, it's a very tight-knit community, but also a very open community. you can come in and everyone's very welcoming. And I was on a call today actually with another large university, and we were just sharing how we approach problems and how we could help them solve their problems. And
Right.
we're not charging for that. That's just, we like to do that kind of work.
Yes, yeah. That's fantastic. I think there is a lot that you can learn from other people that are in the same journey. I mean, that some of them may be a few steps ahead of you, and you may be a few steps ahead of someone else. But I think being able to really work this out and throw around ideas and collaborate on what we're doing, I think that there's a lot of value that can come from that. So if anyone that is listening and you do have enjoyed this conversation and you do maybe you have further questions or follow-up questions you want to ask Joseph, as he mentioned, he's more than happy for you to reach out and connect with him. So if you do have any questions that you want to pop in the comments section below, whether you're watching this on YouTube or LinkedIn or wherever you are consuming this, feel free to pop those questions there or connect with Joseph directly. But Joseph, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me today and having this conversation and sharing all of your experiences and stories with us. I've certainly learned a lot. It's been an absolute privilege.
Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you doing what you're doing and helping spread spread our conversations. And I've learned a lot listening to people you're interviewing, even people I know and talk to. Hearing them talk to you, I learn new things. So I really appreciate it.